What happens when you're in control of your finances, your career, and your well-being? There's no limit to what you can achieve. I'm your host, Jay Vickery, bringing you on a journey through finance, fitness, and finesse. A podcast about developing your 8 dimensions of wellness. If you're looking to elevate your wealth, well-being, and discover the power of balance, join me bi-weekly, Mondays and Fridays, to learn why money matters, but wellness counts. Hey finessers! Welcome to another episode of Finance, Fitness, and Finesse, where we elevate your wealth and wellness. I'm your host, Jay Vic, and thank you for joining me for the Savvy Sunday Scholar, where industry experts share their insights on building wealth, managing stress, and living a balanced life. Before we get started, I'd appreciate your feedback. Help me learn with you by dropping a solid rating and review. I appreciate you for tuning in, as you are an asset in the growth of this show. Depending on how you listen, you can leave a review by looking for the review button at the top or bottom of the page. Today is part 2 of exploring something we use every day but can't live without: food and money. LCSW and Certified Eating Disorder Specialist Supervisor Caitlin Cornell, the founder of KC Counseling Eating Disorder Clinic, is here to discuss the impact of eating disorders on financial strain and vice versa. In part 1 of this 2-part interview, we left off discussing how the relationship between provider and client plays a role in addressing the links between financial strain and eating disorders. Let's get into it. You are an expert in your field and you're always growing your knowledge. I know that you can see the parallels between finances and eating disorders, and you are a straightforward person. So yes, you could address that financial component of it, but you're like, I need to focus on making sure that you are getting an adequate enough of nourishment for your daily functioning. And then down the line, we'll address that. So there is almost a hierarchy of needs in regards to therapeutic treatment, or especially when someone's coming to you for eating disorder specific care. And so I'm not mad that you say that though, because when I tell people about the mentorship that we have, and then one thing, it's funny, Caitlin's like, I will teach you everything I know as long as you don't use it against me. And this experience has been such a blessing because not only I get to give back. For the reason I got into therapy or psychology in general was from my eating disorder in high school, and I wanted to help people. And so the fact that this is my first job is amazing. But going into financial therapy, what I tell people is when Caitlin has a client who is clearly experiencing financial strain in association with their eating disorder, she'll refer them to me for additional assistance, and then vice versa. When I have a client who has a chronic eating disorder, I'm like, go to KC Counseling, because I'm not a specialist in this, but there's parallels here that we need to work together through. A part of what I was hearing in that case example, which I appreciate you sharing that, is there's also a bit of a confrontation piece. And I don't know if confrontation is the right word, but people come to you for help with their eating disorder, but clients don't always want to be completely truthful, or they may not be fully self-aware of why they're experiencing those symptoms. I'm wondering if you can speak a bit on the challenges you may face as a clinician of either confronting someone or addressing their triggers, or like maybe some self-sabotage they may be doing in their eating disorder habits.
So therapeutic confrontation is kind of an art. And I think the longer you get to know a patient, you'll know when it's the right time to kind of confront them about something, and whether or not you should be more blunt or kind of wrap it up in a nice bow, but it's really a confrontation. And I always try to cushion confrontation. So if I was confronting someone about the amount of money they were spending. I have somebody else who struggles with binging. She's got an entire pantry room full of binge foods. And she's also really struggling financially. So the way that I kind of went about that was, first, let's acknowledge that this is happening. I know that you get these foods on sale, but look, I can zoom in on the picture you sent me. Some of these are kind of pricey, even if they are on sale, right? So let's acknowledge the truth about this, which is that you are spending a large portion of your income on food. But then I want her to be able to make an informed decision about it. We have to remain morally neutral. So the fact that she's doing that is morally neutral. she's not a bad person for doing it. It doesn't hurt me. I have no reason to be personally upset with her. If she had like other family members, I might also pull that into it. There's other casualties here, like other people are potentially being affected by the amount that you're spending on your binge foods, but that actually was not the case in her scenario. And then I would just say, like, first of all, do you want to do something about this? We've acknowledged that this is happening. Do you want to do something about it? Because if you don't, I mean, we just need to have informed decisions about this, right? I just need you to be checking into that decision and actively acknowledging, like, okay, yes, I can acknowledge I am about to spend a quarter of my income for the month on binge foods, right? Like, just being truthful, like engaging in truth telling with herself. It has to be addressed, right? Because otherwise, it's just kind of the shame continues to grow and it's this secret thing off in the corner that we're not talking about. But it had to be addressed because it was totally impacting her financial situation. And her financial situation was impacting her health because she was so stressed about it. So in that case, let me circle back to the original question, which is confrontation is an art. And I am not saying that I'm the best at it by any means. There've certainly been times where I came across way too harshly, especially early on in my career. And surprise, surprise, I do that in my personal life too. I could just be like very, very blunt about things. But you really have to pick and choose. Is this appropriate to do with this person at this time? Is there any sort of benefit? Because there are plenty of times, again, with finances. There was another case where I ultimately chose not to confront her at all. I knew she was lying about something with her finances, but we had so many other things that needed to be addressed. I was never going to bring that up. That wouldn't have been particularly useful and it would have distracted from the real reason that she was in therapy, right? Eventually that could have come up maybe, but it just was not appropriate to address that. That wasn't the most important part. Hopefully that answered your question.
You answered it wonderfully, Caitlin. I value that you think it's really important to observe the relationship with the client first. Like where are you at with your rapport? I know that's something that you emphasized in classes and teaching your employees that, there needs to be a good therapeutic relationship before just hammering someone with questions about, why do you do this and why did you do that? Even though we don't word it that way, obviously, but building that relationship to be able to have that confrontation. And honestly, that goes for anyone. It's not only the therapist-client relationship, but there's also a piece from what I heard in that example you gave of confrontation with yourself. That's honestly what happens at the end of the day. Before you seek help, usually people have either some sort of self-confrontation or they may have loved ones encouraging them to seek treatment, but you can't hide from yourself. And that's where that cycle of guilt and shame really starts to pick up is you have these problems, these symptoms, these triggers that are happening in your life. And you may notice that there's outside factors, but also some internal factors that may be affecting those actions and behaviors that you have in your day to day. And it's really hard when you have no control over some of those triggers. And that's why it is really important to seek help. But that comes after some self-confrontation of, okay, I need to make a change. This is not working for me in my day to day, and it's affecting my functioning. And so part of that self-confrontation and not being able to hide from yourself, you can't hide from your bank account. You're going to see those numbers fluctuating, or you can't hide from maybe those trigger foods that are in your pantry that you buy with your money. And we all have different good and bad foods. And it's really hard to find balance generally in life. And that's where, again, I'm such an advocate for the holistic care model and really trying to make sure all of your cups are equal in the 8 dimensions of wellness. But that takes a lot of practice and it takes almost constant self-confrontation. And it's also about addressing from all the different terms we've used, whether it's dieting, accountability, confrontation, discipline, whatever negative connotations that you may have to those words, you need to address them and reframe them to use them to your advantage because those types of things can be a turnoff. I have clients coming in, they're like, I'm just not motivated. I'm so undisciplined. And they can't even associate their well-being or productiveness with those words because they feel like a failure. I mean, that all goes into the confrontation piece. And sometimes you need help with that confrontation. So don't lie to your therapist, because we're here with an unbiased approach to help you reach the optimal functioning that you want to reach in your day to day. When I have my practice of financial therapy, I'm sure I'm going to have people lying to me about their financial situation, but I'm going to have credentials to actually work with their money. And I'm going to be like, if you're not honest with me, we can't really move forward here how you want to.
It'll probably be very difficult for them to lie, because at the end of the day, I imagine you're going to be able to see their bank statements or whatever. If they're spending an enormous amount of money on something, like they can't hide that from you. It's probably going to be such a vulnerable place for them to go to have people looking at your bank account and seeing what you're spending money on.
Yeah, it is. It's a big place of vulnerability. But I mean, sometimes to seek care, I think we need to become more self-aware, and that means being transparent with the people that we're asking for help with. And it's hard, even as an eating disorder therapist, if people are lying to you about what they're consuming or what they're doing to, maybe trigger those behaviors, and meeting the client where they're at. I know that's a huge thing at Casey Counseling. Like, you're not trying to rip out of them the journey that you know that they could be on.
Yeah, plenty of people don't want to show us pictures of their meals, or they kind of maybe bypass some of the things the dietitians are requesting that they do. But I think it's so important to be vulnerable, because these sorts of issues thrive in secrecy. And some of the patients that I've worked with are like my heroes. They are so incredibly vulnerable. I'm like, I can say for sure, I am not as brave as you are. You just laid it all out. Some of the things that they admit to you, which I'm sure you've experienced by now with some of the people you've been working with, some of the things they admit to you, I'm just going to absorb whatever it is that they're telling me. There's so much value in being vulnerable, because I think it also makes it easier for us to do our job when someone's vulnerable and honest with us. But I can also totally understand why people lie. There's like so much shame wrapped up in both finances and with food.
Yep. Comes down to that fear component. Thank you for this conversation, for real. I value this so much because I want to use it as a learning avenue for other people, but this podcast is a way for me to not only just expand the outreach of the approach of holistic care to your well-being, but also for me learning to be a little selfish. Like, I'm not trying to get famous from this podcast or anything, but I love having genuine conversations with other intellectuals in several different fields on how this all connects. I really appreciate you just sharing your expertise in this conversation. So one of the last topics that I do want to address, I'm wondering if you can discuss the economic impact of eating disorders on healthcare systems and communities, because even just in Champaign-Urbana, people are like, oh my gosh, it's a eating disorder clinic and it's local, because the accessibility component is so low. And there's a very diverse population in Champaign, from the university and the economic impact of students experiencing eating disorders to just the local community. It's a pretty broad question, but I'm wondering what your views are on the economic impact of eating disorders on local communities.
What a great question. I think any other major issue, because the prevention piece is not there, like we as a practice are attempting to do that, going in and educating, distributing screeners. We have a self-screener on the website. We're trying to engage in prevention and education so people can intervene very early. Because I think that's where the cost to the healthcare system is with any issue. We could talk about this with substance use. We could talk about this for a number of different things. But when there's no prevention and there's no early intervention, then we have these chronic issues that are incredibly expensive for like hospitals, but also for health insurance companies and things like that. Because again, like any other issue that becomes chronic, you're going to have other chronic issues that come up with it. This is why early intervention is so incredibly important, because we want to prevent some of these things. You know this because you're also learning, like we treat chronic eating disorders much different than like a baby eating disorder. We can be really aggressive with a baby eating disorder, or we should be very aggressive with a young eating disorder, because We want to prevent it from becoming chronic and thus prevent other issues from coming up, like bone density issues, et cetera, et cetera. It's enormously expensive for us not to have prevention in place, because then people, oh gosh, yeah, people are taking up beds in the ER. We have some people who perhaps they have public health insurance, so they have Medicaid and they maybe can't get into a residential facility. Oh gosh, we could honestly talk about this for a whole other hour.
It sounds like physical wellness too. Because I mean, it's
Yes,
like the
yeah.
eating disorder is breaking down our literal bodies. And also, I know you've talked to me about how eating disorders also can change some of our brain chemistry.
Mhm.
And so it's affecting our physical well being. That's another dimension of wellness. And it's sending people to hospitals. And then, hospital
Yes.
beds are taken up. And it just trickles down into everything.
Yes, I've had a number of patients, both with public and private health insurance, who, because it's become a chronic issue for them because there was no prevention or early intervention, they are in and out of the ER like every week. It's so sad. It's obviously sad because that's no way to live. That's not a high quality of life. But it's also, that is so expensive for the healthcare system.
Hmm.
If we're talking about that, to be honest, that's the thing I care the least about whenever I'm working with street. Like, let me think of the economic impact that you're making. But it really is this macro issue that's taking an enormous toll on the healthcare system.
I bet that if there's any copays too of all those ER visits, like if your insurance doesn't fully cover it, that's
Yeah.
expensive too.
It certainly becomes expensive for the health insurance company because if someone is in and out of the ER, they're going to meet their out of pocket maximum, and then insurance covers everything from that point on. That's expensive. Have you ever met your out of pocket maximum before?
I'm below 26, so thankfully I'm still on family
Hmm.
insurance. So I haven't had to experience that yet, but I have
When
heard
it
of those types of scenarios.
when it happens, because the only time I've ever met my out of pocket maximum was the year that I gave birth, obviously, because that's expensive. But then you're like, oh, so now basically everything is free. I'm just going to do everything now. And that's super expensive for the health insurance company because they're going to this doctor and this specialist and this and this and this. And now they're going to take these medications because everything's covered.
That does directly affect other people or at least the communities. And again, I'm not a financial expert yet, but I'll provide some sources in the show notes on this. I was reading it about car insurance at first, but I'm sure it goes along with like other insurance companies, insurance rates or premiums, things like that. It compares, or at least the cost of insurance compares it to a broader population. And like
Yeah.
that's how the prices are determined. For example, if a lot of people are getting into car accidents, then the cost of insurance may go up for everybody because it needs to have more coverage. So,
Mm.
if more people are going to the hospital due to things like eating disorders, the cost of insurance in general could go up because it's expensive for the insurance companies. So, they have to offset that cost somehow.
I'm glad that you explained that way. There is a societal cost.
I want to circle back to the environments that have those food deserts because I'm very interested in intergenerational poverty. And there is a correlation between the communities that have traditionally impoverished families, and that's due
Mhm.
to lack of accessibility to resources to accumulate the knowledge of obtaining different types of assets and things like that, or different types of accounts, things to begin to accumulate their wealth. So there is a correlation between intergenerational poverty and then also intergenerational malnourishment due to the lack of accessibility to either foods that can adequately reach the nutrients that a person needs in their day to day, or just even access to a grocery store as well.
Yeah.
So, what can a person do? I mean, is telehealth really like the main option if someone is trying to seek eating disorder treatment?
Telehealth can be a great option, and I think it's opened the door for a lot of people to be able to get care. So I will say yes to that. I think telehealth is a good option. I always prefer people come in person, especially for eating disorders. I think that could just be personal preference, that I just feel like it's easier to kind of be vulnerable in that sort of setting and make that sort of connection. But again, I think that's more like personal preference. Other barriers though, I think the biggest barrier is lack of competency. Like doctors and parents and whatnot do not know what they're looking for. I would say that the lack of competency is perhaps the biggest barrier from my perspective. Someone could be going to the doctor regularly and the doctor won't know what they're looking for, or perhaps you have a normal BMI, so they're not going to assess you for an eating disorder. I love my doctor so much. He's literally never asked me what I eat in a day. So I think doctors, even just implementing like a basic screener, they don't even have to like be the ones asking the question. Just that should be some sort of standard, like some sort of physical, like going into high school physical or something like that, because we're clearly missing the mark of when to intervene. And all of these eating disorders are turning into chronic issues. Which,
Yes.
as you know, is very difficult to come back from because our brains just don't revert back to how they were pre-eating disorder.
There's probably so many eating disorders that are missed, especially our audience may not know what ARFID is, but it's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And there has been, from what I've learned, a correlation between ARFID evolving into anorexia as you get older. But ARFID comes up usually in kids that are younger, which are people who are framed as picky eaters, but there's something more to that. So if there was some sort of screener approach in just the annual physical, that would probably be a very brilliant preventative approach. I don't know why that's not a
Totally.
thing already.
I think that would at least be like a nice safety net. I think another major barrier is doctors or other providers may have internal bias that they're not even aware of. I think women of color, they experience the same rates of eating disorders, but they're only assessed and receive treatment 1/3 the rate of white women. Like, what is happening that healthcare providers aren't assessing people of color for eating disorders? There's bias. There's so much bias and lack of competency, and if we just had more education, providers would know what they're looking for, and other therapists would know what they're looking for in their clients too. It's really not even part of like a standard mental health assessment.
Yeah, that's
It's
ridiculous.
wild. I'm getting pissed off about
Yeah,
this
you know,
stuff.
in all no, seriously though, in like all mental, in all facilities, because food, it impacts so much. It's
Yeah.
so much. And so, yeah, future episodes to explore more on that, or honestly, start doing your own research. There's a lot of different research out there, or a lot of different forms of information. We'll provide a couple of recommendations for resources to look out for, just to continue to everyone build their self-awareness on this. So you can ask your doctor the questions, because they're not asking all the right questions necessarily.
Yes.
In closing up with some of the advice and resources, what advice would you give to someone who suspects that they or a loved one might be struggling with an eating disorder?
Okay, I'm gonna start with what not to do. I would say most people end up starting with their doctor, like their primary care physician, given what we literally just said about lack of competency. I would hold off on that and get them first screened by a specialist, because someone like me, I'll screen someone or I'll do an assessment, but if at the end of the assessment I'm like, yeah, I don't think this is an eating disorder, I think something else is going on, or this is like very mild, they don't need to see me. So like, start with the specialist. Start with the specialist. Don't start with the generalist, because the specialist will tell you if this doesn't require special treatment. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, or really also don't try to fix them yourself, because there could be a lot of things
Yeah.
underlying there. Sometimes I've experienced some parents who are just like, what's wrong with you? Just do this or do that, and
Yeah.
it's not that
Mhm.
simple. So yeah, seeking a specialist is definitely a really great first step. What
Totally.
is your vision for the future of KC counseling and eating disorder treatment and education?
So I would really love, this is so interesting because we're really going full circle, because I started this saying that I always thought I wanted to do outreach work and I maybe didn't want my LCSW. Obviously, I'm glad I have my LCSW, but I would love to see the practice do more outreach stuff. I just logistically need to think about what that's going to look like and how we can pivot into that, because Obviously, I have to charge for those sorts of things. I can't just do them for free, right? So it's almost like getting people to buy in to wanting this sort of education and knowledge. So that's kind of where I see at least my part in the practice going, is kind of doing more outreach stuff like that. I would love to expand throughout Illinois, but expanding is really stressful. So I'm just going to hit pause on that idea. Long term, like I'm talking about 5 to 10 years from now, I would love for us to have our own residential facility. I think we do it right.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Wouldn't it? Like, I just think we're going to do it right. Like,
Yes, we should have a financial wellness unit. I will place a part of my practice in there as part of yours.
you could have your
for
own
people who
group.
need it.
Like, it could be a
Yes.
recurring group every week. Because I think it's good to have
It's
little,
gonna
like,
happen.
yeah, little non-eating disorder specific stuff, I think is really valuable to treatment. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we'll see. That's a huge undertaking.
Hey, you took this on, you know. You have the guts and the stamina to get there. Everything is figure outable. It may
Yeah.
be frustrating. If you have a
Mhm.
vision and a passion behind it, that's what I'm super excited to see that formulate eventually. And I'm definitely in it for the long run of, just not only the mentorship, but eventual partnership as well of helping you expand this. Again, I got into psychology and therapy for eating disorder care. And so I truly believe in the mission of KC Counseling. If you're in the Champaign-Urbana community, definitely the clinic to check out because of the, approach that we take and the relationship that we have with our clients. You're not a number, you're a person, you matter, and we care about your story. Do you have any book recommendations for the audience, Caitlin?
Ooh, on our website, we have like our resources tab, and that's all the books that I would initially recommend someone starting out reading. We have like books for parents, we have workbooks, we have books for people who think that they're struggling, people who are curious about body liberation. All of the recommendations that I give right away are listed on that tab too.
Thank you, Caitlin, so much for joining me today. This was amazing. And we didn't get to talk about enough because this is such an in-depth topic, but
I know.
I'm excited for more conversations.
Of course. Oh, this was so fun.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Finance, Fitness, and Finesse. A big thank you to Caitlin Cornell for sharing her journey and expertise with us. Remember, financial literacy is key to building a better future, and with community leaders like Caitlin, we're one step closer to a financially empowered society. If you enjoyed this episode, help me learn with you and be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to elevate your wealth and wellness. I'm Jay Vick, and I'll see you on the next More Money Moves episode. Until then, stay savvy, and if you don't know, now you know.